departure, wondering whether I hadn't made a mistake in becoming involved with the Tharios at all. But there being no question of the solidity of the General's position, I decided, since it was not, after all, incumbent upon me to continue a social connection with them, to bear with it and confine my acquaintance as far as possible to Joe and his father. As soon as the contracts were awarded, the struggle began to obtain necessary labor and raw materials. We were straining everything to do a patriotic service to the country in time of war, but we came up against the competition for these essentials by ruthless capitalists, who had no thought but to milk the government by selling them supplies at an enormous profit. Even with the wholehearted assistance of General Thario, it was an endless and painful task to comply with, break through, or evade the restrictions and regulations thrown up by an uncertain and slow-moving administration, restrictions designed to aid our competitors and hamper us. Yet we got organized at last, and by the time 3 Russian marshals had been purged and the American High Command had been shaken up several times, we had doubled the capacity of our plant and were negotiating the purchase of a new factory in Florida. I set aside a block of stock for the General, but its transfer was a delicate matter on account of the indefatigable nosiness of the government, and I approached his son for advice. "Elberich," exclaimed Joe incomprehensibly. "Just wrap it up and mail it to him. Mama, God bless her, takes care of all financial transactions anyway." And doubtless with great force, I thought. Such directness, I pointed out, might have embarrassing repercussions because of inevitably small-minded interpretation if the facts ever became public. We finally solved the problem by putting the gift in George Thario's name, he making a will leaving it to the General. I informed his father in a guarded letter of what we had done, and he replied at great length and somewhat indiscreetly, as the following quotation may show. "In spite of pulling every handy and unhandy wire, I am still billeted on this ridiculous desk. The General Staff is the most incompetent set of blunderers ever to wear military uniform since Bull Run. They've never heard of Foch, much less of Falkenhayn and Mackensen, to say nothing of Rommel, Guderian, or Montgomery. They rest idly behind their Washington breastworks when the order of the day should be attack, attack, and again attack, keeping the combat entirely verbal, weakening the spirit of our forces, and waiting supinely for the enemy to bring the war to us." Although I was too much occupied with the press of business to follow the day-to-day progress of hostilities, there was little doubt the General was justified in his strictures. The war was entirely static. With fear of raids by marauding aircraft allayed, the only remaining uneasiness of the public had been whether the words "heavier than aircraft" covered robot or V-bombs. But when weeks had passed without these dreadful missiles whistling downward, this anxiety also went, and the country settled down to enjoy a wartime prosperity as pleasant, notwithstanding the 50-hour week, rationing, and the exorbitant income tax, as the peacetime panic had been miserable. In my own case, Consolidated Pemmican was quoted at 38, and I was on my way, in spite of all hampering circumstances, to reap the benefits of foresight and industry. Unique among great combats, not a shot had so far been exchanged, and everyone except cranks began to look upon the academic conflict as an unalloyed benefit. Gradually, the war began leaving the front pages. Military analysts found themselves next to either the chess problems, today's selected recipe, or the weekly horoscope. People once more began to concern themselves with the grass. It now extended in a vast sweep from a point on the Mexican coast below the town of Mazatlan, northward along the slope of the Rocky Mountains up into Canada's Yukon province. It was wildest at its point of origin, covering Southern California and Nevada, Arizona, and part of New Mexico, and it was narrowest in the north, where it dabbled with delicate fingers at the mouth of the Mackenzie River. It had spared practically all of Alaska, nearly all of British Columbia, most of Washington, western Oregon, and the seacoast of northern California. Why it surged up to the Rockies and not over them when it had conquered individually higher mountains was not understood, But people were quick once more to take hope and remember the plant's normal distaste for cold, or think there was perhaps something in the rarefied atmosphere to paralyze the seeds or inhibit the stolons, so preventing further progress. Even through the comparatively low passes, it came at such a slow pace, methods tried fruitlessly in Los Angeles were successful in keeping it back. Everyone was quite ready to wipe off the Far West if the grass were going to spare the rest of the country. General Thario's indiscreet letters kept coming. If anything, they increased in frequency, indiscretion, and length as his continued frustration in securing a field command was added to his helpless wrath at the General Staff's ineptitude. "They have got hold of that odd female scientist, Frances," he wrote, "and have made her turn over her formula for making grass go crazy. It's to be used as a war weapon, but how or where I don't know. Just the sort of silly rot a lot of armchair theorists would dream up." Later, he wrote indignantly, "They are sending a group of picked men to Russia to inoculate the grasses on the steppes with this Francis stuff. Sheer waste of trained men. Bungling incompetence. Why not send a specially selected group of hypnotists to persuade the Russians to sue for peace? It would be better to have given them Mills bombs and let them blow up the Kremlin. Time and effort and good men thrown away." Still later, he wrote with unconcealed satisfaction, "Well, that silly business of inoculating the steppes came to exactly nothing. Our fellows got through a course and did their job, but nothing happened to the grass. Either Frances gave them the wrong formula, possibly mislaid the right one in her handbag, or else what worked in California wouldn't do elsewhere. She is busy trying to explain herself to a military commission right now. For my part, they can either shoot her or put her in charge of the whack. It's of no moment. You can't fight a determined enemy with spray guns and formulas. Attack with infantry by way of Siberia." End of Chapter 4, Part D.